All right, welcome back to another episode of Nature Aquariums TV, where today it's all about the plants. We're going to be talking, ABCs of plants and everything else you need to know. But before we get to that, remember to like, share, and subscribe to our videos, and leave your comments below. Leave us your questions, anything you want to know about plants. We're going to take care of it for you guys. All right, guys. So today we're going to talk about plants. We're going to explain to you, the different types of plants, how you should use them, how you should prep them for planting. But before we do that, we're going to do a little bit something special for you guys. We are going to hide our Nature Aquariums logo somewhere in today's show. And the first 3 people that go and send us a direct message and tell us where you found the logo, you got to be exact, it'll be pretty easy to spot if you're watching the video, you're going to get a little plant pack from us sent to you free of charge. Let's get going with our show. So a lot of people ask us about plants, and there's a lot of confusion, the different types of plants, how you should use them, how you should fertilize them, are they low light, are they high light, how does it work? So we're going to first start by putting plants into 2 groups. One group is going to be the plants that get their nutrition from the water, right? You have this as your tank, you're going to have the water column, and they pull in the nutrients, nitrates, phosphates, potassium, and they pull it from the water column. The other type of plant is going to be a root feeding plant, and those plants primarily pull their nutrition from the roots, okay? So it's going to be, this is important, where they get their nutrition. That will determine where you're going to use these plants in your aquascape. And it's going to also determine what type of substrate you should use. So for example, these are cryptocorenes, okay? These are swords. They're primarily very heavy root feeders. And the roots over here are trying to pull their nutrition from the substrate. If you plant them in gravel and sand don't do a really good job of holding on to nutrients, so therefore you're going to have to apply additional root tabs in order to get the nutrition to the plants. You have other plants, like a lot of the stem plants, or plants like Anubias, that they do a good job of pulling nutrition from the water column. And therefore, if you have a aquascape that is primarily sand and gravel, and you want to put your plants, maybe you may want to go with Anubias, where you see the roots are exposed, they don't want to be buried in substrate, and they're going to pull their nutrition from the water column. Now that we know that there's 2 types of plants, let's dive a little bit deeper into what these plants look like and how to use them. Let's talk about water column feeding plants. And I'm going to cover the most common types that you can find at most online stores and at most of your aquarium shops. The very first one is Anubias, okay? And Anubias are super wonderful. They're low light requirement plants, which means that if you have an inexpensive light, they're most likely going to do well. If you have higher light, well, you know what? Don't put them up so high. Put them a little bit lower into the substrate or into your tank. 2, they're slow growth. And slow growth is easy because it means you don't have to fertilize every day, right? They're going to want to take their nutrients slowly. And because of that, they're a very popular plant. So one of the things that you need to know is that you can buy Anubias pretty much in 2 forms. Either in a pot, okay, like this, in which they're planted in rock wool. See, as I'm pulling the rock wool apart, here is the Anubia. And very importantly, you have the roots, you have the rhizome. The rhizome should never be buried in gravel. It needs to have access to oxygenated water. Whereas the roots, they can go into the substrate, but as long as this part over here really needs to be exposed and let it grow. Also, Anubias have 2 ends. The cut end where it was propagated, this is never going to grow, and then the front end where new leaves actually come out. And this is the direction that you want to plant it. So if, for example, you're attaching it to a nice piece of wood, you would not want to attach the plant like this because it's going to try to make a U-turn and grow towards the light. So you always want to orient the Anubia this way. The other way that Anubias are sold are they're already attached to a piece of wood like this, or to a piece of lava rock like this. And what's nice with these, you can actually kind of wiggle it and set it into the substrate, and it's going to be fine. The same thing with these. If you put these against a larger piece of wood or stone, they'll actually end up crawling and the roots will attach themselves to the new substance. Lastly, you can use Anubias on decorations. Some people love these statues or decorations that they put, and they'll attach Anubias to there. The other plant that is very similar to Anubias but comes from the opposite region of the world, by the way, Anubias come from Africa originally, now they're grown worldwide, are Bucephalandras. And Bucephalandras come from the Indonesian rainforest, and they're beautiful. They come in a lot of different varieties, shapes, and sizes. Here you can see there's a couple other styles of Bucephalandras. They're still discovering new varieties out there. The plant is very, very cool. It is smaller than Anubias. Anubias can get really, really large with leaves about this big or really tiny leaves, whereas Bucephalandras all tend to be a little bit smaller. You should follow the same requirement. They don't want to be buried into substrate. Pull it out over here, and you're going to have the rhizome and you're going to have the roots. And you want to make sure that the rhizome is always above substrate. One last thing with Anubias and Bucephalandras is that in paludariums or terrariums with high humidity, they can grow out of water, and that makes it a very versatile plant. Once again, both of them are low tech, no CO2 is required, easy maintenance, as far as fertilization, and their slow growth, which all makes them perfect for low tech setups. So next up on the low light, and it pulls from the water column, are going to be Java ferns. And Java ferns are a fan favorite when it comes to easy to take care of low light plants. Now, Java ferns are an aquatic fern. They are fully underwater plants, so they really need to be underwater for optimal growth. But they follow the same route as Anubias and Bucephalandras, meaning that they have a rhizome root that should be above the gravel. Now they're going to throw a lot of roots, and those roots can go into the gravel or substrate, but these are best either put into a mat like this, which comes pre-packaged, or you separate them and you attach them to wood. And they really do a really nice job as a background plant behind driftwood or rock, kind of as in a spray pattern. There's a couple of different varieties of Java ferns. In the hobby right now, there's about 5 of them that are mostly commonly available, and they have different sizes, different colorations and shapes. It's all going to depend on what your preference is. The last plant that I want to talk about, which is not really a plant, but it is a fern, and it is a moss, pardon me, and these are going to be Christmas mosses, Java mosses, so many types of mosses, and they usually are sold in either cups or they're sold already pre-packaged on items. Like in this case, this is Christmas moss on a pad that we're used for our Foresta systems. Mosses will come in on wood, they'll come in on coconut shells, you can attach them onto just about anything. Now the mosses are cooler water plants. In other words, they're not good for a discus tank, it's just going to disintegrate. They really don't do well in temperatures over 78 degrees, so they do perfectly fine from 68 to 76 degrees is the optimal temperature for mosses, which is why they're always used in shrimp tanks. The shrimps do great at cleaning up the mosses. The shrimps like cooler water, and therefore the mosses grow really well. Now the mosses will do well with CO2. They'll grow even more vibrant. They also grow without CO2, but they do need fertilization. So next up, we have stem plants. Stem plants, people either do really well with them or they struggle with them. And let's go over a couple things. Stem plants are usually sold with lead weights. You cannot just plant this into your gravel, guys. You have to manually take out the lead weight. The recommended weight of planting stem plants is 1 stem at a time. You should use your tweezers. Get these. One of the favorite things that I like planting stem plants is kind of form an L, okay? Because they're going to try to float up until they establish roots. So if you put the bottom like this, when you first plant them, the plant's going to be a little bit sideways. By the next day, the plant's going to go itself right itself up towards the light. So what makes stem plants unique is that a lot of them will have roots both at the bottom and throughout the stem. As you can see, these white strings, they're actually new roots. So these guys will actually pull nutrients from the substrate as well as the water column. The reason they grow new roots is because in the wild they will break off with strong currents. Something will break them off, the plant will float along, get stuck someplace and attach itself to a new location, and that's how they propagate. It is important to note that stem plants will vary in nutrition requirements, will vary in light requirements and CO2 requirements. There are some stem plants that are low tech, medium light, no CO2, fertilize them once or twice a week with liquid fertilizer. There's going to be other stem plants that are going to be very high demanding in CO2, high light, and may actually require both fertilization, both under the substrate with a proper aquarium substrate for planting and nutritional fertilization above. So do your research on the plant that you're getting to make sure that you give them the optimal conditions. Next up is a type of plant, and it's not a type of plant, it's a type of packaging that some of you may or may not be used to or familiar with. It's been around in Asia and in Europe for a long time, but it's now kind of sort of becoming available in the United States. And this is called tissue culture. And tissue culture plants are usually sold in a package like this, in a little cup. And what makes them unique is that they are grown in a gel. As you can see, there's a gel like this. This is a highly nutritious gel. And the plants were propagated by small cuttings. What makes them unique is that they were grown without any pesticides. They were grown in the cup, so you're not going to get any snails. You're not going to have a plant that was exposed to copper-based pesticides to keep snails out. And you're going to have a plant that's going to actually grow very, very fast once put into the aquatic environment. They usually have a faster turnaround than do conventional plants. The tissue culture stocking of plants is growing, every month. There's new varieties available. Just recently, I started being able to get Anubias in tissue culture, and they look fabulous. They're wonderful, but they're very small because there's only so much that you can put inside a tissue culture cup. The other thing to keep in mind is that you can actually buy a very large plant like this. It will be its baby form inside a tissue culture cup. So don't think that just because the plant looks small in the tissue culture that it's not going to grow to its full potential. So people ask us, how do I deal with the tissue culture? How do I plant it? Well, it's very simple. First part, open it up. And when you take out the plant, it's going to be in a gel. And one thing that I suggest, have a cup of water and gently swish it around like that. And now you're going to have the individual plants with their delicate roots intact, which is super important when planting a lot of these small plants. I can tell you that with the exception of Anubias, tissue culture plants, because of their finite and small root system, you should be using a fine aqua soil, like Contrasoil Fine or one of the Contrasoils. They're really great from UNS because their grains are small enough and they're delicate enough that the roots are going to take, really quick to it. You should see most manufacturers of tissue culture plants usually try to put in a color coating to make them whether they're more difficult or less difficult. In this case, with the UNS plants, they actually put a red label on the more difficult ones, yellow label for the intermediate, and green labels for the easy plants. So now we're in the home stretch, guys. We're in the home stretch of talking about rooted plants. And I'm going to talk about my two favorite types of plants. And these are going to be Crypts and Swords. There's a lot of really unique things to them. So both of these plants are from parts of the world that there's two seasons. There's the dry season and there's the wet season. And let's explain what that means to you. So imagine this is the sandy beach where this Amazon sword is growing in. And we're during the rainy season and the water level is high and the plant is flooded. It now has leaves that needs to be more effective at pulling in light and carbon dioxide. So it'll have leaves that are specifically grown for that. Well, the rainy season stops, the dry season comes in, and the water level starts receding, and now the water level is about here or lower. Now the plant doesn't die, but it'll look like it dies. All the leaves start melting. They can't hold themselves up because when it's flooded, they use the water to sustain the leaves up, and people think the plant is dead. It is not dead. Actually, the plant is now growing new leaves that are above water leaves, called immersed growth. And what makes the immersed growth leaves unique is that the stems are stronger, but they only take in CO2 from the underside, because as you know, there's more CO2 in the air than there is underwater. And so the plant's going to grow these also a little bit more reflective. Usually they'll have more greener leaves above water versus they'll have darker, redder leaves underwater. Same thing with cryptocorynes. They do the exact same process. So why does that impact you? Well, in the nurseries, these plants are grown above water to get them to grow as quickly as possible. So when you see this beautiful sword, okay, at your favorite store, it's going to look like this. You're going to plant it underwater. You're going to take it out of the rock wool gently, preserving the roots, and you're going to plant it underneath your tank, and all of a sudden the leaves start dying, and you think, oh my gosh, what did I do? Well, that's a normal process. That's because the plant is shedding its above ground, above water leaves, which are immersed, and creating new immersed leaves. And those leaves are going to be set to take in light and CO2 more efficiently. They're also going to be the stems are going to be less rigid because they're meant to flow along with the water. If they have too rigid of a stem, they'll actually break off in the current. So that's what plants will do. It usually takes about a month for the plants to grow new leaves. Same thing with cryptocorynes. Crypts come from Indonesia, swords come from the Americas, and they come in all shapes and sizes, from really big giant plants to really small plants, but they all follow the same thing. It is important to note that when you get a plant like this that already has roots coming out and you take it out of the rock wool, that you gently separate it like so, and that you get rid of all the rock wool that's in there. If you have excessive roots, trim anything that's longer than 1.5 to 2 inches. You do not want excessive roots showing at the bottom, because when you trim the roots, you're actually going to force the plant to grow bigger and stronger roots into your substrate. By all means, this wasn't an all-in-one comprehensive video, but we did try to cover the majority of the plant groups. So these are a couple tips and tricks. When you buy plants, if you're not going to plant them right away, leave them in the bag, spray them with water, and leave them sealed. They'll stay longer better. Plants need to be kept cool, so do not leave them in a hot car. If you're shopping around, take them with you. Don't leave them in extreme hot conditions. Most of the plants do not like to be over temperatures of 80 degrees. There are some exceptions, but 83, 84, 85 degrees is the upper end of most plants. 2, fertilization is key. It's far more important than lighting. The plants can adapt to the lighting levels, with the exception of very high demanding plants, but most of them do need good fertilization. Do your water tests, check for your nitrates and phosphates. Make sure that you always have a little bit of phosphate into your tank. Don't put phosphate pads or nitrate pads into a planted tank, into your filter, because you're pulling out the food that the plants need. Most reasons of algae are caused because you're not feeding your plants enough. And make sure that the fertilizer you're using, read the label, make sure that it has nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium in the right ratios. If you have questions about that, feel free to leave us a comment. I'll go and answer those questions for you in the comments below. Other than that, plants are a great way to add life to your tank. They're great for your fish. One of the things that will happen is that plants will get biofilms, and they'll get all sorts of life growing on them that a lot of the fish are dependent for nutrition. Okay, so they're going to go and feed off the plants. All that being said, guys, enjoy putting plants in your tank. As always, we thank you for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Remember to be the first ones to comment there for your special plant prize pack, and have an awesome day. Thanks for watching.